Hello, my name is Anthony, the humble horologist, and you're watching Defining Time. So you ask a good question. Well, let's start with some obvious stuff. This is not a watch. This, however, is a watch. So what's the difference? Well, a clock is something that you can look at that is mounted on a pole, on a wall, or even on a building like Big Ben in England. A watch is something that we wear on our wrist. At least that's the way we do it nowadays. The word watch comes from an old English word that has to do with keeping a lookout, watching out for something. And back in the old days, when watches were available, miniaturized, very small versions of clocks, watchmen who used to stand on the wall or walk the streets of a city carried this timepiece with them to watch the time as they watched over the city. Many people think that is where we get the word that is now used for the timepiece on the wrist, watch. But watches weren't always on the wrist. Watches used to be clocks that were miniaturized down to the point where you could actually carry them around. They weren't actually on the wrist. They were literally worn like a pendant. Some of the oldest ones, if not the oldest watch, looked more like a round ball than it did a disc that would be worn on the wrist, or a pocket watch even. But that gradually progressed and designs changed to where for most of the time that when we think of watches, most of them were pocket watches. Literally watches that you would carry in a waist pocket or a coat pocket or your pants pocket, maybe attached to a chain or not. It was something that you'd flip open, hold in your hand, look at the time. But this became something that as technology progressed, became something that was a little bit impractical. For instance, in 1904, there was a man whose name was Santos Dumont, the last name, and he was a pilot. And he needed a way to fly an airplane without reaching into his pocket to pull out a pocket watch and take his hand off of one of the sticks that he was using to fly his airplane. So he asked his friend, Mr. Cartier, the jeweler, if he could design something for him, a watch that he could actually wear on his wrist. There became the first pilot's watch. But even before that, Louis Breguet gave a watch, he had made a watch, was commissioned by the Queen of Naples in 1810, a watch that was worn around the wrist. Now, the wristwatch was primarily something that was for women up until World War I. World War I showed how that carrying a pocket watch and trying to climb out of ditches, trenches, and doing all kinds of other things that came with being a soldier was, a little difficult. And so some people started taking those pocket watches and putting them on straps and attaching them to the wrist. It became a little bit more obvious that after a while this was something that could be improved upon, and so companies came out, companies like Elgin, Hamilton, Waltham, and made watches that soldiers could wear and marketed as such. Therefore, after World War I, wristwatches were now something that were identified with men as much as anybody else, and men started wearing watches like the soldiers did. and watch companies began to start making watches so that could be done. So wristwatches really became popular only after the early 1900s. And since then, all manner of brands have developed, everything from Longines to Rolex to any other kind of brand like Timex and more inexpensive brands all over the world. So what is a watch? A watch is not a clock, but it is a clock that we can wear on our person to keep track of the time. Well, speaking of time, it's about time for me to end this video, but I do want to ask if you would check out some of the other videos on this channel, The Humble Horologist, and maybe you just might find something you like. If you do, like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone else, and come back again real soon. Until the next time, remember, watches or clocks are replaceable, but time is not. Use it wisely.